think if somebody takes something that doesn't belong to them, they're not just a thief. I think even if you kill somebody, you're not just a killer. And you cannot do justice until you know the other things that people are. I tell you, I was driving here from Montgomery this afternoon, and I go through these parts of Lowndes County where there's so much poverty. We've got people in Lowndes County with no functioning wastewater. People in Wilcox County. There is actually a return of hookworm in this part of the country. Because we are ignoring what's going on, and I'm persuaded in this country that the opposite of poverty is not wealth. I don't believe that anymore. I really don't. I think we talk too much about money in America. I'm persuaded when I drive through the Black Belt, when I go into poor communities here and there, when I go into urban communities where poverty has been devastating, I don't believe that the opposite of poverty is wealth. I believe that the opposite of poverty is justice. If we're going to do something about poverty, we've got to do something to advance justice. And finally, I believe that even on these anniversaries, even on these amazing occasions when we come together, we have to measure ourselves, y'all, not by how we treat the people who are famous and well-known. We can't measure how we're doing in this movement. We cannot measure how we're doing in this community. We cannot measure how we're doing in this nation by looking at how we treat the famous, the rich, the privileged, the powerful. We've got to measure how we're doing by looking at how we treat the poor, the incarcerated, and the condemned. That is the metric that matters most for us. I'm going to end with this. Finally, there is a different metric system for you. I want you to please try to remember. Don't measure how effective you are by how many people applaud you, by how many people know your name. Don't measure your students how effective you are, your commitment and capacity to change the world by the grades you get. If you're working, don't measure your contributions by how much money you get made. There's a different metric system for those of us who are trying to change the world. I was giving a talk down in southwest Alabama. And I was in a church, and this older man came into the church. He was sitting in a wheelchair. And this older black man, he came a little late. He was staring at me the whole time I was giving my talk. And he had this stern, almost angry look on his face. I was trying to figure out why is he looking at me so hard, but he kept staring at me. And I was trying to get through my talk, but I kept looking at him. And I finally got through my talk. People were very nice. They came up after the talk. But this man kept sitting in the back staring at me. When everybody else had left, he got a young kid to wheel him up to the front of the church. He came wheeling down the middle aisle of his church. And he still had that stern, almost angry look on his face. And when he got in front of me, he put his hand up and he said, "Do you know what you're doing?" And I just stood there. And then he asked me again. He said, "Do you know what you're doing?" And I stepped back and I mumbled something. Then he asked me one more time. He said, "Do you know what you're doing?" And then he said, "I'm going to tell you what you're doing." And then this man looked at me and he said, "You're beating the drum for justice. You keep beating the drum for justice." I was so moved. I was also really relieved because I just didn't Then this man grabbed me by the jacket and he pulled me into his wheelchair. He said, "Come here, come here, come here. I want to show you something." And then he turned his head. He said, "You see the scar I have behind my right ear?" He says, "I got that scar in Greene County, Alabama, 1963, trying to register people to vote." He turned his head, he said, "You see this cut I have down here at the bottom of my neck?" He said, "I got that cut in Philadelphia, Mississippi, 1964, trying to register people to vote." He turned his head, he said, "You see this dark spot?" He said, "That's my bruise. I got my bruise in Birmingham, Alabama, 1965, trying to register people to vote." He said, "I'm going to tell you something, young man." He said, "People look at me, they think I'm some old man sitting in a wheelchair covered with cuts and bruises and scars." He said, "I'm going to tell you something." He said, "These aren't my cuts. These aren't my bruises. These aren't my scars." He said, "These are my medals of honor." We are here. We are here to honor people who have been cut and bruised and scarred so that we can make some progress. But more than that, we are here to gather the courage to go get proxy, to change some narratives, to stay hopeful and do uncomfortable things until we get cut and bruised and scarred. So it won't be the same way necessarily, but it's important that we understand that in that space there is redemption, there is freedom, there is reconciliation. I never used to understand what they meant when I was in church, and they'd say, Jesus says, "The first shall be last and the last shall be first." I didn't understand that until I represented people on death row and walked out the door when they'd been exonerated. And I didn't understand that Russian literature I was reading in college, and Dostoevsky says, "Truth crushed to earth shall rise again," but now I get it. I didn't understand what Dr. King was talking about when he said the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. I understand now that where there are people like us who are willing to do the hard things, who are willing to get proximate, change narratives, be hopeful and do uncomfortable things, that's how we advance justice in this country. And I'm excited to be in partnership with you as we all do it together. God bless all of you.